All right, welcome everyone to the Joint Housing and Community Development Committee and Social Services Committee meeting of Thursday, June 13th. Welcome everyone. I'm calling us to order. We're still waiting for the rest of the quorum, I think. Yes, okay.
We have
but we
quorum, we have quorum on the, so this is a joint committee, so we have quorum on the HCDC side, but we do not yet have quorum on the SSC side.
Got it.
We will most likely have quorum starting on
Soon.
7:15 or 7:30 when Councilmember Burns
Right,
arrives.
great, okay. Well, our first order of business is public comment on the fiscal year 2024 action plan, which, as we all know, has been the proposed amended plan is before us this evening. Are you making public comment? No, okay. We have a person who signed up to give public comment online. Is that so? LaShonda Nicholson, are you there?
She signed up to give public comment in person and is not here at the moment.
Okay.
We did not receive any other public comment regarding the action plan or any other agenda item online.
All right, well then, we are gathered here tonight because the 2024 action plan that was approved by council was drafted on estimated grant amounts to be received from the federal government. But when the actual grant amounts were announced in May, we learned that there were no ESG funds, no emergency solutions grant funds included. And so we need to go back and amend the action plan for final approval from council in order to receive the federal grants. So, staff, do you want to say a few words? Good.
Yes, we have a presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the great summary and introduction, Cherryville. So we have a presentation to kind of explain where we're at with the grants, as well as what is changing in the goals and the impact around those changes or lack thereof. So one of the key things we wanted, because this is a joint committee and we haven't had a joint committee for a really long time, we just wanted to clarify the roles of each committee. This is a joint committee, but from voting perspective, will work as if this is two separate votes from the two separate committees. The SSC is involved in this conversation because it is under the ESG allocations are under their purview. The HCDC committee is responsible for overseeing the development and implementation of the action plan, consolidated plan, and all funding under those plans. So the SSC will be specifically responsible for accepting and placing on file the allocation around ESG and public services. And then HCDC is specifically recommending and approving to recommend to City Council, if they wish to, the whole plan. But we are required due to our citizen participation plan and the public process to make sure that both committees are discussing this together. So that's why you're here. A quick summary on the actual grants. So as part of the draft action plan process, last November, HCDC reviewed and approved allocation by percentage for each grants. That's Community Development Block Grant, Home, and ESG by goals. And we did that through an estimate of what we thought the grants would be. They tend to be fairly conservative. So now we're coming back with updating the action plan with the final amount. Usually this does not require this level of changes, obviously because of the ESG funding change. This is a substantial change, so we're here tonight because of this. We did not get ESG, which means that we are not receiving, sorry, can you go back? We are not receiving the $145,000 of ESG fund that we were planning to get in the action plan, and we'll get to talk about that soon. But On the other hand, we did get quite a bit more of CDBG than we actually planned. And we got about the same amount as home funding as we thought we would. So in the total, you can see we're actually, when we combine all grants, we actually have a tiny bit more funding than we thought we would, even though we lost the entire ESG grant. So when it comes to ESG, Emergency Solutions Grant, that's historically been used for and is allowed to be used for emergency shelter operations, street outreach, homeless prevention and rapid rehousing activities, which is generally speaking under the kind of rental assistance umbrella. This funding historically, I think you can go to the next slide, was allocated by Social Services Committee to two subrecipient, the YWCA for an emergency shelter operation and Connection for the Homeless for all four allowed activity, which included the shelter, street outreach, rapid rehousing, and prevention. So we did not receive the ESG grants through no fault of City of Evanston specifically. The reason why the City of Evanston didn't get the ESG grant is because this is a grant that's made by formula based on a budget set by Congress. And based on this year's calculation, our grant would have been $144,268, I think. And the threshold to receive direct entitlement, meaning funding that goes to the city, is $145,000. So we missed it by about $700. It's based on census data and population. There's nothing specifically we could have done that would have resulted in us getting that grant. Now, the funds are not completely lost. What happens is they go and get swept and the state of Illinois gets them. And they do an ESG program. So what that means is that essentially we aren't, the City of Evanston isn't able to do anything specific, but the organizations that are part of our community are able to apply if they're recommended to state ESG. And this is essentially what's happening. So the Continuum of Care, the alliance that was presenting last month at Social Services Committee, is the body that recommends funding for the state. An organization cannot apply to get state ESG unless they've been recommended by the alliance. And we've collaborated with the subrecipient and the alliance, and they've suggested that they're willing to recommend funding for the two organizations we usually fund. Generally speaking, at the same level that we would have funded with this funds. Actually, YWCA would potentially be able to apply for more funding because the state ESG threshold is $25,000 and they usually would get 15. So that is the good news from that situation is, yes, we're losing the funding, but we have good hope that the organization that we're going to receive the funding are going to get it through the state. The less nice news is that the state ESG is different requirement, and prevention is not allowed under state ESG. So essentially that means that the funding is going to be at the same level for Connection for the Homeless potentially, but that would be only for two activities, which is homeless shelter and street outreach. Jessica, do you want to add anything?
So I actually believe that the requirements are the same, yes, for shelter and outreach. And I believe Connections will also receive rapid rehousing. Understood? No, they're only applying. Okay, then no, I have nothing to add. So sorry. Don't mean to muddy the waters.
There is, as Jessica is stating on this slide, there is a potential reduced visibility because we used to get specific reporting for Evanston household because we got direct ESG. That reporting is not going to come to us anymore, and it's going to be state reporting. So we may not have as much about that data as we used to. So something to note. So when it comes to what that means for the action plan and the changes, what that essentially the key part around what you received is that we had a substantial amendment because we were losing ESG, but we also made some other changes based on other grant amounts. The action plan process right now is in line with the regular HUD process. The reason we have the action plan is because we have to be able to meet the goals that have been set as part of the 5-year consolidated plan. That was the 2020-2024 consolidated plan. This is our last year, so the action plan is set to be able to meet the goals that we had set to do in the 5 years. The action plan is driving the use of CDBG, home, and ESG, and it essentially sets how we're going to spend those funds based on the goals that we have and the goals that we've set under the consolidated plan. And those goals are listed here on this slide. As I've mentioned before, next slide. We have specific requirements within a participation plan that set when we have to do a substantial amendment. Losing ESG meant that we were meeting one of these requirements. We had a goal that changed more than 20% in allocation, and therefore this is why we're having a 30-day public comment period, this meeting, and a substantial change to our action plan. Okay, so to the summary of the changes. We're going to go through that maybe in a little bit more detail once we have the spreadsheet, but at a high level, the homelessness goal is changing from two things. We have the ESG funding that's been reduced to $0, but we've also made some changes to the allocation that was made under home, which is for tenant-based rental assistance under the Home TBRA program. We are suggesting to move $100,000 of those funds under the affordable housing goal. The reason for that is because we have a previously approved project, which is an affordable housing project, a 33-unit project that has been approved by City Council and by HCDC for funding of up to $1.5 million of home and affordable housing. Affordable housing funds are our most flexible funds. By making this change, we're essentially allowing us to use home funds, which are more restricted for this project, and reducing the amount of flexible affordable housing fund we would use for this project. We do not have a wide variety of projects that are eligible under home. This is a good project for home funds. This allows us to keep more flexible funds for other projects. It also allows us to be able to stay in compliance with the grants, meet timeliness of expenditure, meet requirements for those grants. And we're doing that knowing that we currently have already about $250,000 of previous allocation for Home TBRA that we're able to use. So there's no impact to the services. We will continue and have new cohorts. It's just an optimization of grant fund use, essentially. So on paper, it does look like the homelessness goal is reduced quite drastically. In effect, we're just moving money to the optimal goal, essentially. The second changes that's happening compared to the estimate is that the CDBG grant is quite higher than what we had estimated. So we've made the changes to the dollar amount to the goal based on the percentage that HCDC had approved at the last committee. So as a result, all those goals got a little bit more money, essentially. The only goal, sorry, actually, that's not true. Public services is not changing. We didn't add any more funding. Not that we don't need it. It's just we are capped at 15%. So we were at the maximum and we kept it at the maximum. There's no more funding we can add to this goal by regulation. And then there's no changes to the economic development goal. Next slide. Do you want to show the spreadsheet?
Well, or could we I think there may be some comments and questions.
Yes, I thought we could put the spreadsheet with the details because I figured the question might be a little detailed as well.
Okay.
But yes, I'm open to any comments.
Okay. Well, Councilmember Harakaris had a question.
Yeah, I was pleased to see that, even though we're losing the ESG funding at the city level, there's the possibility to get those state funds for our partners. Do we have an idea roughly when we'll find out if they are approved as a grant recipient from the state?
Yes, they have a very reduced timeline. They were told at the end of May that they may need to apply. They got, the COC got the allocation for the recommendation around that same time. And I believe the applications are due in June and the grant year start July 1st. So it's fairly soon.
Very soon. Okay.
Yeah.
The other question I have, just just so we know, like kind of procedurally, this added step of having to reapprove this, is this in any way pushing back the usual time when our partners get their check from us?
Well, I guess it depends which partner you're talking about. It shouldn't impact anything because we're talking, we're still meeting the guidelines. It has impacted our workload,
Yeah.
but our timeline doesn't change. So whether we are updating the action plan with actual grant amount or whether we're making a substantial change, we still are required to provide to HUD the action plan within 60 days of the grant allocation being officially announced. So it just essentially meant we had to get things
We just had to hurry
done in a
to
certain
get
time.
to meet. Okay, thanks.
which is why we had such a tight timeline for this meeting. But
we should be getting the checks at the same time as we normally.
generally speaking, I
Yeah.
can let Jessica talk a little bit more if that has an impact on your public services or anything like that, but
No, it doesn't. And we still have a portion of 23 ESG funds to spend through that will carry connections and the Y over until we know more about the state allocation, if that's a concern.
Thank you.
Any other questions, or would you like more information from staff who's going to talk a little bit more?
I was gonna go over in as much or as little detail as you needed to.
Okay.
But I just wanted to make sure we had the spreadsheet with the
Mhm.
estimates and the actual, with all the details around the activities that had been approved. There's not a lot of movement possible,
Mhm.
but it's sometimes helpful to have all the
Mhm.
details for
Right.
people to understand.
Yeah.
I don't have a ton to add.
Right.
We did lose some admin fund through the loss of ESG, but we recouped that through an increased CDBG grant. So there was no impact there.
Okay. Well, Social Service Committee members in particular, do you have any questions, since this is obviously a big change from what you all have been discussing?
No,
Yep.
I was just happy to know that we had those extra funds that we could supplement some of our direct services with to tie us over until everyone gets an answer from the state. Please, state, hurry up quickly, in the hopes that I know it's a lot of extra pressure on the staff of these organizations to get a response. But I'm hoping that it'll happen much sooner than later, because historically it's been a very large lapse of time. Do you anticipate any of that lapse of time with the state?
I don't anticipate a long lapse of time. I definitely do agree that it is a definite additional administrative burden. It may be the same type of grant, but we've heard from both organization and the Alliance that it's a lot more cumbersome to work through the state and report to the state. So that I know that will be added burden for them. As far as the timeline, I don't believe there's an extra delay. And should there be any delay, we are still working through the 23 funds. So there's that.
Does the state usually have a lot of ESG funds to distribute? Is this
That is a question I do not have the answer to. But I can come back to you with that. I do know that, what we were waiting on, was we heard that we weren't getting the, allocation for ESG. But we weren't sure how much the Suburban Cook County Alliance allocation was going to be. They, were very thankful because they lobbied and worked closely with the states, last year around the way they run their formula. And that has very much impacted what dollar amount they got this year, because they specifically discussed kind of, communities losing and changing and how that would impact, their each continuum of care allocation. Oak Park and Will County are two areas that are kind of in the same situation we're in now, where sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. And it changes. So that has impacted their allocation, but for a little while, we weren't sure exactly if they were going to get a big increase or not, based on the fact we were now part of their continuum of care essentially for these allocation. So yeah, I don't have a ton of information on this.
And you indicated that we wouldn't be getting the information directly to the city from the organizations, but can we
Request.
encourage them to share that information with us?
So Connections does receive a portion of CDBG funds and local funds. So Connections will be reporting outcomes for their drop-in and outreach services. And the Y receives a portion of CDBG and local funds for their shelter operations. So we will be getting those numbers.
So do we usually use that kind of information as in the discussions about the coming year's awards, or how do we normally use that information?
So the information that we're losing is about rapid rehousing and prevention services. And it is, I think, helpful to understand the need for those resources in our community. We will be relying on the point in time count to understand our homeless population within the continuum of care, so beyond Evanston, but within our continuum. And through that report, we can also understand the number of shelter beds and permanent supportive housing beds, so beds available and bed utilization. So that is one way to understand, again, the need in the community. And I'm sure, we have a very close working relationship with the Connections, the Y, and the Alliance. So we're hopeful.
Right, yeah. No, I would expect good cooperation, yeah. So any HCDC members, do you have any comments or questions, or while we're waiting for our quorum? Or maybe staff can tell us more.
I mean, I'm happy to provide staff update if you want to move on to another
let's do
topic.
that, right.
They'll be short, but I can provide that. I can also give you an update on quorum if you'd like. So right now we're just waiting for one SSC committee member,
Right.
as well as just Councilmember Reed to be here so we can
Right.
take the vote.
Yeah.
As far as stop update, I am very, very happy to report that as of today, our CAPER has been accepted by HUD. So we submitted the CAPER, the performance report, last March, and they reviewed it, provided comments, and it's fully accepted and on file. So we're very happy about that. And then I wanted to remind the HCDC committee of the numerous meeting that you have on your agenda for this month. So we have the regular HCDC committee on 6/18, which so far we do have quorum for this meeting and are moving forward. That includes a discussion and introduction around the inclusionary housing ordinance, as well as a discussion around the strategic housing plan. And then there is the special committee on 6/25. I do not have an update on quorum on this meeting, but if you have not provided your information, feel free to provide it soon. And that is the special meeting regarding Jessica's eviction discussion. So those are the general staff update. Jessica, I don't know if you have anything else.
So SSC, your meeting schedule isn't quite that intense, but we will meet again in July. And at the July meeting, we will talk about the mental health provider program and summarize how that is going. I don't want to jinx anything, but I hope we have a new member for SSC at that meeting. And because we will have a new member, it would be nice to review our BCC sort of policies and procedures, not to approve them, they've already been approved, but just to get a foundation of how we operate as a body. That would be lovely. And then we are also looking at, in preparation for our upcoming funding cycle, the public services that our funds support, in thinking about next steps. Yep. So, yep, that's it.
Yeah, that's the general update we have for you tonight. Okay.
So given that we're in the last year of our current action plan, how could you talk us through how we're going to develop our next
Sure.
action plan?
Very good topic. So we are currently starting the process around drafting the next consolidated plan, which will be 2025 through 2029. We're in a slightly different situation that we were in last time we did a consolidated plan. We have a lot more data available to us, a lot more surveys that have been run, a lot more plans that have been written. So Jessica has been hard at work reviewing a lot of that information that's available both internally as well as externally through various organizations, to try to gather as much information to inform this plan. We currently are reviewing our steps for outreach, and particularly targeted outreach, to make sure that we hear from the organization and the residents that specifically benefit from the grant funding, and then our target for the grant funding. And there is a timeline that is going to basically run us through the end of the year. So at the July meetings, both committee will hear an update on the consolidated plan, what we're looking at, the type of activities that can usually be funded with the funds that we have. We're going to continue our work through the summer, and we'll be coming back to the committee, to HCDC in September, to provide an overview of the needs assessment that we would have done through the last quarter, essentially, to provide an update of where Evanston is at, what we've heard from people in organization, and try to start conversation around funding. And then through November would be essentially, October, November would be essentially when we start presenting a draft consolidated plan. That would be with HCDC. And then we'll have a vote in December. So it follows as far as the vote, it's a very similar process to the action plan process. But we do want to have touch point in July, in September, and in November to make sure that we have those conversations, so that when we come to the point where we're presenting a draft plan, we've already gotten feedback from the committees as far as direction. As well as you've heard information as far as what we've gathered, where the community is at, and what we have heard from residents and organization. the plan essentially is going to provide some direction. It's a 5-year direction on how we're going to spend CDBG and home. We are very likely not to include ESG in this plan because at this point, we are not sure whether or not we would get ESG and don't necessarily want to include in the plan if we can't get that funding. So we'll have to deal with that on a year by year basis, essentially. I am expecting less CDBG funding next year. There were some pretty challenging budget conversation this year already. I think we were happy to hear that CDBG stayed at a fairly flat level of funding essentially, and we didn't lose too much home. But we do have indication based on the budget that was provided by the Biden administration, as well as other conversations that are going on, that we should expect cuts next year on the CDBG program. So that we'll definitely be thinking about that. The other items that we're thinking of as far as the consolidated plan and the use of fund is potential changes within the community, and understanding how to make the best use of the restricted funds that we have. There has been more and more challenges, particularly using restricted grant funds for some of our programs, such as rental assistance or things like that, because there's such high level of federal requirements and restriction that it's becoming harder and harder for our partner organization to actually use those funds to find affordable units within Evanston because rent prices are increasing and because of other requirements. So we're trying to make sure that we're looking at the community needs as a whole, but also at all the other sources of funding that the city may have at its disposal to make sure that we're matching programs with the right source of funding to be the most efficient and have the most success with those funds. So yeah, there's a little bit more of a looking at what's happening to make sure, because we've seen a little bit more changes in the recent years than we have in the past.
Okay. We have a couple of questions. Chloe?
Thanks. That was very detailed and helpful. So I don't want to destroy the suspense or anything, but I was wondering, one, if you could say more about what the specific new challenges are for the rental housing assistance. And since we're kind of talking about some of this stuff anyways in other discussions. And then also when you mentioned new data, do you mean sort of like updated figures, or are there actual new things that you're collecting too?
New data for what we didn't have last time?
Yeah.
What we have updated figures, yes, because that's part of the consolidated plan. We run very similar report from one plan to the other. So we're going to look at what trends, if there's anything that's drastically changed. Historically, we've been on a certain path and it's just kind of sometime worsening a little bit, but sometime improving, but there's not drastic changes, but we'll always check that. When I talk about, it's more, we have a variety of, we may have the E-plan for health, or we may have the water reclamation district that's done some work, or we may have the sustainability team that's provided information. There's just a very wide variety. There's been surveys for reparation. There's just been a lot of work that was done that wasn't necessarily available 5 years ago when we were working on the last plan, where there maybe not have been as much information. When it comes to rental assistance, we've had a variety of challenges depending on the program, their restriction. One of the key challenge has been to find affordable units for the families that we're looking, like they may have rental assistance and may have been approved for rental assistance. But as an example for Home T-Broad, we're finding that the delay in our partners finding suitable units within the rent requirements or with the size needed for the family that's looking for it, the delay has been increasing because they're just having more and more trouble finding those units, which isn't extremely surprising when we see kind of the trend around rents in Evanston and the fact that we were already 5 or 10 years ago talking about the lack of larger units available for rent. That's one of the key issue. We've the size of the unit and the rent restriction has been a big one.
That's not a regulatory sort of change, right? That's just a sort of the sort of demand for size has changed, or, I mean. have the-
Well, we have, with the majority of those programs, we have federally set, restriction on the maximum rents per the unit size. So, and that's often based, I believe, on zip codes. And so depending on which area we're in, if the provider is having trouble finding a unit within that set rent,
Okay.
and there's already a lack, then, yeah. Essentially, the market rate is higher than, and then when you put on top of that, the fact that it can be challenging to find landlords that are willing to work with rental assistance or anything like that, there's that level as well.
Okay, Councilmember Reed?
I was just going to suggest that since we had a quorum for social service or for HCDC, that we could take a vote, but now we have a quorum for both committees, and
Right, yep.
so we can add Councilmember Burns to the roll. And
Right, yeah. No, so, so I guess the question is, do the committees, plural, have any further, any more questions or comments to offer? So we're going to have two different votes. We're going to have a vote of the Social Services Committee first. And there, so I would like someone to make a motion, someone from Social Services to make a motion to accept and place on file.
so moved.
Cherry Bell,
Whoops.
can we declare the quorum?
Oh,
And do the roll?
Do we have to
Because I think we didn't
have a
do
roll,
that yet.
have a roll call? What,
Okay.
oh, go ahead, please.
So for Social Services Committee, Vice Chair Amanda Nagola. Present. Thank you. Ken Rowling,
Present.
Kathy Hayes,
Present.
your Councilmember Burns,
Here.
Councilmember Reed.
Here.
Do you want me to? And for the Housing and Community Development Committee, Chair Ravel.
Here,
Thank you. Councilmember Reed,
Here.
Councilmember Burns,
Here.
Councilmember Harkaris.
Here.
I'm sorry, Committee Member Thurston.
Here.
Thank you. And Committee Member Zalomi. I apologize.
okay.
Thank you. My last name is Wingeter, so we have that shared. I apologize for tripping over your name.
All right. So back to someone from social service. Oh,
I
yeah,
move that we accept and place on file the ESG, the
the 2024 action plan.
2024 action plan.
Okay, that, yeah, that governs the use of our emergency solutions grant funds. Is there a second? Okay, we have a second. Can we have a roll call for that vote?
Thank you. Vice Chair Nagola. Aye. Thank you. Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Thank you. Ken Rowling.
Aye.
And Kathy Hayes.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right.
And
That's good news. And then, yeah, now we need a motion for the Housing and Community Development Committee to recommend to City Council approval of the final 2024 action plan reflecting the changes in the allocations as presented tonight.
so moved.
And a second,
I'll second.
okay?
Chair Ravel,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Eric Harris.
Aye.
Chloe Thurston. Aye. Joanne Zolomi.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, excellent. So we've had our staff update and then now we're also open just for regular public comment. But I don't believe we
I don't believe we have any.
any.
Yeah.
So if no one else has any other items to bring before the joint committees here, then we stand adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.